here. First of all, the drive up here was amazing. It was just so beautiful, it was so sunny. It was just a really good omen, I guess. And then seeing the town, it's just lovely and quaint, and this church is amazing. So thank you so much for having me in this sacred space. I wanted to, I guess, start off kind of with some questions. I'd asked Amy to disseminate information. Did you have it? Is that possible that people get that? Some people. Okay. Oh, look, they got them. So it's that was an effort to try to get the basics of Islam out there, so that we could talk about more juicier aspects and answer more questions. And I'd asked Amy to send out a request for the most politically incorrect questions you could think of, because what ends up happening a lot in the South is people tend to be very genteel and don't want to be impolite sometimes, so they end up asking cute little questions, but then they walk away without really having their real questions answered. So I've got a few of them, not that many actually. I was hoping for more, but if you have more during today, then I'll be happy to answer them. But one of the questions that was asked was to kind of give a little history about how I came to Islam. My mother is from Barranquilla, Colombia. My father is Palestinian. He left Palestine in 1948 and went to South America. He met my mom there, they got married. He used to sell fabric door to door, and she was a seamstress, so that's how they met. And then they came to America to seek their fortune. They're still seeking it. So they, my father, when he grew up in Palestine, the people who lived in Palestine grew up with Christians, Muslims, Jews all together. The town in particular that my dad grew up in, there was a Christian town right next to, they shared the same street, so he had a lot of Christian friends. And also in the Quran and the Islamic doctrine, there's this concept of the people of the book, which are people who follow the guidance from the one God that we believe is the one and only God, and the guidance from the prophets that were sent before. So that includes Adam and Abraham and Moses and Noah and Jesus, and then the final prophet being Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. So with this kind of in his DNA, when he met and married my mom, it wasn't that big of a deal for him to marry a Christian woman, because it's permissible in Islam. It's permissible for, and she doesn't even have to convert to Islam, just because she's a person, she's one of the people of the book, and she's permitted to follow her tradition. So that's the context under which we were born in. It's a longer story, but I won't go into it. But so I ended up growing up Catholic, is what ended up happening. My father didn't really know much about his faith growing up. He kind of learned it through osmosis, like a lot of people do with their faith. He knew that there were Christians who lived the same way that he lived, so he didn't really see the big difference in the way that things were. So when we were raised in the Catholic Church, and figured some religion was better than nothing at the time, because there wasn't a lot of Islamic organizations established in Buffalo and Cleveland at the time. So I grew up, was baptized in the church, and I just before confirmation, for those who are not familiar with the Catholic rites, which is when you're around 12 or 13, it's a time when you make a commitment to live your life as Catholic for the rest of your life. My dad at that time had started to learn about his faith, and he realized that there was a lot more differences than what he thought. And so he wanted us to wait until we were older to make that decision to be confirmed. And I thought at 12, 13, I thought that was a good plan. And at the time he tried to teach us something about Islam. But when you're 12 or 13, you already know everything there is to know. So you don't have any interest in learning anything new. So we didn't really take to those instructions very well. And I ended up marrying a man who's Palestinian. And he's also Muslim, but not really practicing at the time. And we really didn't talk much about religion when we got married. It wasn't until we started having children, that I realized I needed to teach them something. So I started to research, and I was ready to go with whatever my research told me. And my dad had provided me with a lot of Islamic information, so I started reading about that, and that really resounded with me. I had a lot of questions growing up as a Catholic, and I found the answers in Islam. And one of the big questions, or things that bothered me, I guess, as a Catholic, was this concept of original sin. And the fact that Adam and Eve, well, first of all, Eve is more culpable from what I remember, Eve was more culpable than Adam. She's the one who tempted Adam. And if you look at history and society, the way that that has fallen, how that story of Adam and Eve as the temptress and the one who brought down man, that actually contributes to a lot of the anti-female sentiment throughout history. So that, as a college student, I was very offended by it also. And what I learned in Islam was, so the Christian, what I remembered in the Catholic tradition was that Eve tempted Adam, they disobeyed God, and that's where God turned away from them. And they had this concept of original sin, where everybody was born with the sin that Adam and Eve had committed. And I remember in 2nd grade saying to the nuns, that's not fair. Why are we considered sinful for something that they did? I was not even responsible for that. And I remember having that conversation and being told that you just had to believe it on faith. So that was something that I had a problem with even in 2nd grade. So when I read the Islamic version of the same story, the big difference was that Adam, it says the two of them disobeyed. It doesn't put the fault more on Eve. And being the feminist that I was and am, I thought, yeah, that sounds more reasonable, that the two of them disobeyed God. And then here's the big thing was that they disobeyed God, they realized what they had done, and they asked for forgiveness, and here's the kicker, God forgave them, right then and there. And so there was never this disconnect with God. What I had felt growing up with, and I don't want to disparage the Catholic faith, but what I felt growing up was that I had to talk to the priest, who would talk to Mary, who would talk to Jesus, who would talk to God for me. So these levels of separation was something that bothered me even as a young child. So when I heard this concept that God never turned away from us as humans, that's what really enticed me. That's what really resonated with me. And I felt that this was the guidance I had been searching for. And so that's really the big aspect of it. This concept of God, instead of being the angry God, it was, and there's an Islamic doctrine that says when you turn to God, God comes running to you. Mm-hmm. And so that concept of God wanting you to make connection is the thing that really drove me to believe that what Islam was teaching was the thing that was right for me. So that's my journey. My mother is no longer practicing. For her, growing up in South America, being part of the Catholic Church is a very big aspect of who you are as a person. So it was hard for her for a long time to distance herself. However, she saw the church was very different in America than it was from where it was when she was growing up. So she had kind of distanced herself from the church itself in the U.S. And then as she started learning more about Islam, then she took Shahada and she accepted Islam as her faith as well. I've got two sisters who are Christian. My older sister is non-denominational Christian. My younger sister has a Master's of Divinity in Early Christian Education from the Southern Baptist denomination. And Franklin Graham spoke at the graduation ceremony. But she and I have a really close relationship. We are both trying to follow God's path. And we talk to each other about matters of faith. We've talked to each other about the differences in our faith, and we have a really good, solid relationship there. So that's, just so you know, that's kind of what my background is. I've got a sister one sister who's Muslim and a brother who's also Muslim. So that's kind of my family history. My children are also raised in Islamic tradition, so they're all practicing Muslims. Another question that was asked, so I hope that answers that question fully. The next question was, you're a modern woman who works outside the home. Can you tell us why you chose to cover your hair? This was a big move for me. One of the things that disturbed me, once again, when I was very young, is in the Catholic tradition there is this thing called Vatican II. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when you say Vatican II? So this was a big shift in the Catholic Church in the way that they operated, in the way that they did things. So here I was as a young person, I don't even remember how old I was at the time. And here we had been told that God said this, God said this, God said this, and then all of a sudden, oops, we changed the rules. Now we're going to do this, this, and this. And that really was the start of my shaking of the foundation of my understanding of the way the Catholic Church taught the faith, because I felt like, how can a person make a decision that is changing all of this, what I thought was God's rules. So that was something that I struggled against from a very young age. So when this whole concept of covering your hair came up, I thought, that's just something some man made up, and I'm not going to do that. That's just not, it doesn't seem right to me. That's just some guy's idea of wanting to keep his women under control. So that was something that I rejected, that I pushed against for a while. So I started to learn more and more about it, and I had this desire. It was something that I thought I would like to do. And I remember I had an American friend who had converted, and she had real pretty blonde hair. Whenever she and I would go to the mosque together, we were learning about Islam together. We would cover our hair when we went to the mosque. But when we were going to Kmart, we didn't do that. So she came over one day, we were going to go run errands together, and she was covering. And I'm like, what? We're not going to the mosque today, so what's all that about? And she said, well, I figured this is something I could do, and it isn't worth going to hell over. And I thought, man, that's something I could do. And that is something I can do. I've fallen short in a lot of other areas of my faith and my relationship to God and the things that I'm required to do. So this is something I can do. So I started, that was kind of my encouragement, aside from, along with all the feeling that I had wanted to cover. And this covering is a statement, it's actually a part of my faith. It's an act of worship to cover. Because what I'm doing is I'm saying, no, God, I am doing what you've asked me to do. And hopefully, everything, it'll kind of cancel out some of the things that I did that were wrong. So that's a part of that. That's a part of it. Another aspect of it is, to me, in society, women are looked at as sexual objects, and that's just the reality of it. So to me, to cover is to say that my value and my worth to society is not based on my physical attributes and my sexuality. It's based on who I am as a person and how I comport myself and how well I follow the dictates of my faith. So that's what made me decide to cover, and it's something that I feel like it's a protection for me, and I feel very confident. I feel it's actually very liberating to be covered. I don't have to follow the dictates or the mandates of fashion industry, but I do have to match. I've got a whole closet full of scarves. Everything matches, kind of, hopefully, most of the time. So that's why I decided. And as far as covering goes, I'm required to cover in front of men who are not part of my family. So if when I'm at home, I don't have to cover. So when I'm around my husband, my father, my uncles, I don't have to cover. My boys, I don't have to cover. But if some man comes over who's not part of my family, then I would have to cover. So if the mailman comes to the door, I've got a little scarf next to the door that I just put that on. So those are the conditions. So I don't have to cover when I'm at home. People ask me, do you have to wear that in the shower? I will wear it to the pool though, because it's outside. So yeah, I'd have to wear something like this to the pool. So that's that answer, hopefully. Okay, so now coming to the more juicy questions. One of them was, why do they allow fellow radicalized Muslims to be so destructive? Shouldn't they discipline their own? Yes. Yes. Tell me how to do that. Tell me how to get somebody who's like way off the path, who's totally wrong in their thinking, who for some reason has amassed some kind of power and has the might. Tell me how to rein them in, because I'd like to know. And there's things that in America we have an opportunity to, and for example, the whole Trump rally. We stood in silent protest. So that's something we can do here in America. We've got this First Amendment right to do that. Other countries, not so much. There's people who, if you recognize the whole Arab Spring, the uprising, where people were trying to stand up and trying to say, this is wrong, we can't do that. And you see how that really hasn't worked so well, especially if you look at what's happening in Syria. So when people try to stand up, unfortunately, it doesn't work because of the failed mechanics of the political structures that are in other parts of the world. So here in America, the people are so afraid of terrorist cells in America, and that there's mosques who are training terrorists, and that just isn't true. There isn't any mosque anywhere in the U.S. that is doing that. The people who are doing these things are people who don't go to the mosque. They don't come to the mosque and learn about things. And if they do, they've got some kind of secret agenda that they're not disclosing to people because they know that it would be rejected. Their ideologies would be rejected by Muslims. So people who are harboring these bizarre notions are people who are not in keeping with Islamic doctrine. They're not following the faith. They're picking and choosing like maybe one sentence out of the Quran and saying, see, this is the sentence that I'm going to live my life by without having read the whole paragraph or the whole Quran. So it's like saying, you know, round up all the crazy people and make them stop doing this crazy stuff. And it's just impossible to do that. Think of even like when you think of Dylan Root in Charleston. You know, I can't imagine somebody who sat, because I have this notion that if you have an opportunity to meet people face to face and talk to them one-on-one, that your fear of the other person would subside and that your hate of the other person would subside. Unfortunately, this Dylan Root episode where he actually sat for an hour with these people before he killed them, I said, I can't even fathom how could somebody do that? How is somebody so miswired that they could do that? Or, you know, what happened in San Bernardino. And I'll be honest with you, this whole San Bernardino thing, I just don't understand it. There's so many unanswered questions about what happened there. It just doesn't make sense to me by anybody who has followed the faith or who knows anything about Islam. They have to know that what was done there was wrong. And then I think about how we haven't really heard reports from people who were in the building who recognize the people who were shooting. I think there's a whole lot of unanswered questions about that. So I'm just going to put that out there to kind of keep researching what actually happened there, because I don't think those people operated alone. I think that there was other people, but it's not Islamic doctrine. It's not like they were like waiting for their opportunity to initiate some kind of Islamic thing. They were more similar to what Dylan Root was thinking in Charleston, where he was plotting this thing that is outside of whatever his teachings were. So this is not an example of what Islam should be. This is an aberration and something that is not following Islamic doctrine. Another question was, so I hope that answered that question. Another question was, what about their thinking about and acting against women? You might ask, so people ask the question, why, are women oppressed in so-called Muslim countries? And the answer is yes, there are women who are oppressed. But it's not because of Islam, it's in spite of Islam. Because the people who tend to follow their cultural, things that are cultural rather than what the Quran actually dictates. If you look at the rights that women got from Islam, they're really like there's the right to own property. Think of that from an American standpoint. It wasn't that long ago that women weren't allowed to have their name on property. So women were given the right